Here at the Peak Performers Podcast, we know a lot of entrepreneurs have high hopes and big-time aspirations. Folks like us are constantly inspired to do great things. But a lot of times, we get bogged down in the details. Getting Things Done is more than just one of the most influential business books of its era, but has made GTD shorthand for a revolutionary technique for approaching professional and personal tasks. David Allen, author and creator of GTD, says practitioners can achieve and maintain a more productive and creative condition by using mental energies to think about things rather than to think of them. On this episode, we chat with David Allen about the best practices for staying on top of your game. We pinpoint exactly where people struggle when trying to get things done and how to create a domino effect in order to get things done more efficiently. And that's coming up right here on the Peak Performers Podcast.
Welcome to this edition of Peak Performers Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
David, thank you very much for joining us today. I know the audience is going to get so much out of today's episode. I was really looking forward to today's broadcast. I have been using your system. I think it came out in, 2001?
Yep.
Yeah, love the book. For the audience that has not been around or has been asleep at the wheel or doesn't have the internet, give them a little bit of an overview of what the GTD system is all about.
Well, I spent 30 years basically researching, testing, implementing what are the best practices that allow us to stay on top of our game in terms of all the stuff we have to deal with, all the commitments we have, all the inputs we have, and to be able to sort of navigate that in a way that prevents that from being a distraction, but being an opportunity. So I just figured out a set of behaviors that we're not born doing. So it actually is something you need to learn. You don't do it naturally. Some people do pieces of this all the time, but it's what I did was make this best practice conscious, made that explicit, and built a coaching and training and program and wrote a book about the whole methodology.
Have you seen a big shift since 2001 when it first came out and what technology is now done? And obviously it's getting more difficult to get through all the stuff.
The big shift is the range of audience that now absolutely need this for sanity. You know, when I first wrote this in 2001, it was pretty much the high potential, fast track professionals that were starting to be bombarded by the digital world. Now, ministers, clergy, physicians, attorneys, teachers, stay-at-home dads, everybody's getting bombed with more to do than they can do. And trying to manage a busy life with the stress of opportunities and trying to stay on top of that. So what's really changed is not the methodology. I mean, that's old as dirt, and it'll be true 200 years from now when we go to Jupiter. You're going to need to, capture, clarify and organize and reflect on, all the stuff, that you're committed to do and need to keep track of. That's been true forever and will be for eternity. What's changed really is the audience that needs to know this and needs to know how to navigate, through it.
It's applicable to everybody. What do you find are some of the areas that most people struggle with? Is there one particular area that, just kind of always be the issue of, okay, let's step back, make sure you've got this taken care of?
Yeah, Thor, it's real simple. Your mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. And most people are trying to use their head as their office, and it sucks as an office, period.
I always say that. I try to keep nothing in my brain. I want to dump it out all the time. What do you recommend? What sort of brain dump? Is it once a day? Is it twice a day? What's the ritual?
It's nice once a week to have some sort of a weekly review where sort of catch up and grab all the things you may not have grabbed as they came along, because things come at us pretty fast these days. So, but you need to build in some sort of reflection and a regroup, bring up the rear guard kind of time. We call that the weekly review. A couple of hours where you just sort of catch up and get everything current with all your stuff. But the truth is, once you really catch this, you should be capturing everything as it occurs to you. Just like taking notes in meetings. If you say, hey, David, would you get back to me about that? I'm going to pull out something right now and write it down now, instantly. And the fact that most people think their head can do this, and they think they're not paying a price by not tracking that in some external rigorous way, they're making a huge mistake. And that's a big habit to change.
And I find a lot of people also think that they're pretty good at multitasking. So I'll just do this. I'll capture this at the same time. I'll just process some emails at the same time. Poor system.
Well, you can't multitask. I mean, it's just that's impossible to do. I mean, all the cognitive science research has basically said your brain can handle about 4 things, in its short-term memory, and not lose track of what you need to be remembering or reminded of, and the relationship between them. As soon as you add a 5th or 6th or 7th, you're screwed. You're going to be driven by latest and loudest at that point. And most people have hundreds, not just 4 or 5, that they're still banging around in their brain, so they haven't captured it, they haven't clarified it, they haven't organized that stuff, they haven't put it someplace so that it takes that pressure off their brain, because you don't need time, you need space, you need room in your head. But unfortunately, all that stuff is taking up real estate in most people's brains. And that's where a lot of the pressure and the stress is coming from.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was at a meeting yesterday, and I said, what do you really need? What can I get for you? And 2 people said, I just need more hours in the day. So, well, that's not going to happen. You got to manage yourself, not the hours.
I mean, come on, 2 more hours, and they have 2 more hours of the stress they're in. So it's a good thing it's only 24 hours, yay. Otherwise, you're going to, unless you change something of how you're doing what you're doing, you're not going to get rid of that stress.
Yeah. And I find the more time that people have, things just kind of flow into it. If you don't have a good system set up already, the stuff will just end up getting in the way and just occupying that space. Let me talk to you a little bit about delegation, because this is an area that so many of my clients suffer with. They're pretty good with all the other pieces, but they just don't have this delegation piece down. What tips do you tell your clients about the delegation?
Well, first of all, many of your folks, listeners, they actually can't delegate the final outcome of something, the project itself. They need to be in control of that. But they probably haven't decided yet what's the very next action that needs to happen on this. And the next action is usually something, and oftentimes something that can be delegated, especially if you're at a senior level or you're an entrepreneur or you're at the top of the heap. The next step is something that, hey, I need to get a meeting set up with my banker, or I need to make sure that X, Y, and Z happens, or hey, I need to whatever. And because they haven't actually sat down and thought about what's the execution piece that needs to happen on this thing, then they're the bottleneck. I coach a lot of senior people and have over many years. And invariably, I have to go warn all their direct reports that laxative is about their boss's brain. Because as soon as I sit down with them, they start unloading. Oh, God. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I can hand that off to them. Okay, whatever. Because I get them to make the decisions they need to make about this stuff that's hanging out in their head. And many of those could be task out to other people. So things tend to constipate uphill, not down in organizations. So, that's probably the major key, is deciding what's the very next action that needs to happen on the things that people have attention on. And oftentimes then, if those can be delegated, they should. And then, of course, you need to maintain a good, rigorous system, keep track of what you've handed off to people.
Do you find it's the strategy or the psychology that kind of gets in the way of that delegation?
Yeah, all that. All that. It's more that people resist actually getting it down to what's the next action. It's a big resistant process out there. Most people don't decide next actions until the pressure forces them to, as opposed to, wait a minute, if I were going to move on this right now, where would I go? What exactly would I do on this? And that's something we're not born doing. You actually have to train a cognitive muscle to train yourself to actually think about that. And that's what hangs things up a lot. It's the biggest source of procrastination, is because people aren't doing, because they haven't decided what doing looks like and where it happens. Is that nails you need to buy at the store? Is that something you need to talk to your life partner about? Is that an email you need to draft? Is that a spreadsheet you need to come up with? What's the very next step on that thing that has your attention? And people tend to avoid that like the plague.
Why do you think that is?
Beats me. I don't know. I think it's because it forces you. See, once you get down to the action level, then you're kind of held accountable to this stuff. If you don't get it down to the action level, you can say, "Oh, I'll be perfect in my mind," and you could sit there and just sort of play with yourself in your head all day long. until you get down to, okay, what's the very next physical thing I would need to do to move this forward? That makes you get real honest about how real this is, how meaningful it is to you, and, what's your commitment to actually move on this.
Accountability. Let's talk about it. Why are New Year's resolutions so seldomly seen through? Well, a lot of times life just sort of gets in the way. Priorities shift and we lose sight of what's most important. We need help. If you get sick, you go to a doctor. If you have car troubles, you go see a mechanic. If you got busted pipes, my friend, you need a plumber. That's why for things that are really important that you just can't do alone, you have to call an expert. And Thor Conklin is an accountability expert. It's impossible to have accountability for achieving your larger-than-life goals all alone. It just can't work. So what do? Well, just like with a cough, a carburetor, or a clog, you get a hold of an expert in the field. www.thorconklin.com/accountability.
I find a lot of people spend a lot of time in areas that really aren't that important. And a lot of times there's this one item, of this one task, of this one project that if that was done, it would take care of a lot of the other things. Is there any process that you can help people to hone in on what that one thing is that attacks or knocks down the dominoes of the other things?
Well, I would approach it this way, Thor. I agree with you. I think there are, linchpin, kind of projects and habits that if you actually did those and got those handled, they would make a lot of the other dominoes just sort of fall down and fall in place. But I think it comes back to my methodology, which is basically, look, what's most got your attention? What would clear your mind the most if that was not on your mind anymore? And I think people just need to get honest about that. And that's how I make priority decisions. It's called, hey, what's most on my mind? Because frankly, I discovered years ago the deliciousness and the how cool it is to actually have nothing on your mind, to be able to focus on painting or playing or drinking wine or hanging out with people or writing a business plan or whatever. Being totally present to do that with none of the other distractions that sort of keep us from doing it. But I discovered also that in order to be able to get there, you got to handle what's most got your attention and what do you need to do to get that off your mind. You don't actually have to finish it to get it off your mind, but there are some things, and that's what my methodology did, was describe what's the algorithm, what's the formula that you need to walk yourself through to be able to get cat food off your mind, to get your business, next business plan off your mind. What do you need to do to get your relationship off your mind? Because there's an inverse relationship between on your mind and getting done. So anybody listening to this, wherever your mind has gone since Thor and I have been talking that had nothing to do with what we were saying is the first thing you should deal with. Why did that pop into your head? It's probably because there's some decision about that you haven't made, or you haven't parked the results of that in some trusted system. And what it's done is now it's taken up cognitive or psychic real estate that's not available for other stuff. So you're not optimal in terms of your cognitive process unless you've actually handled the things that most have your attention. So long answer to your short question, but that's really, people just start to need to get much more sensitive about what most has your attention right now and what do you need to do to take that pressure off your psyche.
That's great advice. I find that so often entrepreneurs and executives, they push off the things that they don't like doing or aren't good at, and those just kind of grow. They just, as you think about them over and over again, that thing that you say that's on your mind the most, and instead of just attacking it, and then when you finally attack it, it's like, wow, that just took 30 minutes. Now it's done. I think we build them up in our minds to be much bigger than they actually are.
Sure, the people who procrastinate the most are the most sensitive, creative, and intelligent people because they can freak themselves out in a quarter of a second just thinking about anything. That everything that has to be done to do it perfectly and all the potential negative consequences if it's not done perfectly, and they just blow their own fuses.
Thank you so much for listening today. I really do appreciate your time, and I hope you found today's show valuable. If you would like to receive these shows automatically to your phone or to your computer, simply go to iTunes and subscribe. After listening to several of the shows, if you're so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating, as this helps us reach additional people and spread the message. If you're truly committed to taking your life to the next level and doing whatever it takes to become a peak performer, but something's holding you back, something is blocking your way, and you just can't seem to figure out what it is, send me an email to info@thorconklin.com. and I'd be more than happy to get on the phone with you. We'll schedule a 15-minute discovery call. No obligation, no cost. I absolutely love to hear from the listeners, and if there's something I can do to help, I'd be more than happy to do that. Also, if you found something of great interest in today's show and you want to share that with your friends and family, simply go to my Facebook page, Thor Conklin, click on the episode, hit the share button, and share it on your page. You can follow me at Twitter at Thor Conklin. The website is thorconklin.com. We're constantly adding new free resources, discussing additional tricks, tips, tools, and strategies on how to be a peak performer. Remember, I try to keep these episodes short so you can listen to them during dot time, doing other things, commuting, driving, walking, working out. Decide to be a peak performer in all that you do. And until tomorrow, have an absolutely amazing day.
That brings us to the end of another episode of the Peak Performers Podcast. Be on the lookout for part 2 with David Allen, where we'll discuss what entrepreneurs are missing and the 3 secrets of highly productive executives. That's next time, right here on the Peak Performers Podcast. We'll see you at the top.